friends, it's Professor Ray. Just kidding, I'm not a professor yet, I'm just a grad student. But they say dress for the job you want. Today I would like to talk to you about some environmental behavioral theories, particularly concerning ideas of privacy and also neurodiversity. Environmental behavioral theories are an academic look at how people behave in certain environments and how those environments influence people's behavior. It's a really interesting area of study. There's one in particular that I read a year and a half ago for my design research class that I think is really interesting and really relevant to a lot of discussions about how we're going to be shaping our environments for the future, particularly when it comes to public spaces such as offices and workplaces and also educational institutions. My favorite of these environmental behavioral theories is Alan Weston and Erwin Altman's theory of privacy. Now, this is a book by Erwin Altman from 1975 called The Environment and Social Behavior. And in this book, he discusses Alan Weston's theory of privacy and then expands upon it to present his own theory. Weston's theory proposes that there are 4 types of privacy: solitude, intimacy, anonymity, and reserve. So, what do those mean? Solitude involves being alone and unobserved. So this is where you are completely alone in a room, for instance, alone in your own bedroom at home. That's solitude. Pretty straightforward. Intimacy is being alone with another individual or small group. So being at home with your one roommate, being alone with a best friend or with 2 best friends, just a small, intimate, close group. Anonymity is the experience of feeling alone in a crowd of unknown people. So this is the experience you might have walking down the street. If there are lots of people walking up and down the street, you have that kind of anonymity. People don't know who you are. You have that feeling of being alone when you're at a coffee shop maybe, and there are lots of people around, but you don't know them, they don't know you, you're just minding your own business, and you're just sitting there. Reserve is when someone is tuning out the people in their surroundings to be alone with their thoughts. That's also really, this one is really common. So similarly, in a coffee shop experience, you might tune out all the people around you so that you can kind of be alone with your thoughts. You have 2 types of privacy working for you there. You have the anonymity, and you can also use the reserve, where you kind of go into yourself. You might have this kind of experience in all kinds of public places, in schools, in work environments, all of those types of things. It's the kind of privacy that you make within yourself. But it does require you to be able to do the tuning out, and not everyone is able to do that all the time. So, next up, Weston also proposes that there are 4 functions of privacy. The purpose that those types of privacy serve. There are different kinds. There are 4, again: personal autonomy, emotional release, self-evaluation, and limited and protected communication. The purpose of privacy to achieve personal autonomy concerns self-worth, independence, and also identity. When you need emotional release, when you need privacy for that purpose, the idea is to relax from social roles. And I can cite this, Altman, 1975, page 19. Self-evaluation is time spent in private for the purpose of reflecting on past experiences and planning for action in the future. The idea of limited and protected communication is being able to confide in others and have intimate conversations or meetings. Reading through that list of functions, you might then start to kind of connect those to some of the types of privacy. Really, there's not a direct tie between the types of privacy and the functions of privacy. Some might facilitate those functions better than others, but really, there's a lot of leeway between that. It kind of just depends on the person, what they need, what is available in the environment at that moment in order to make those things happen. Diving into how this applies to our actual environments, I'm going to talk about the context of workplace and educational environments the most. So for a long time, like office settings, they divided things into cubicles, and you had this complete privacy. You were completely cut off from the world. You had acoustic and visual privacy, and also it was just a sea of cubicles, and it was impersonal and cold, and people said, this isn't good, right? This doesn't facilitate, teamwork and communication and creativity. And so then we had this movement to just kind of open everything up and make it all open plan. And we're starting to realize today that that's also bad. The problem with that is that people don't have very many options. They're basically surrounded by people all the time, and then their only option for privacy is reserve, which means their only option is to be able to try to tune out the environment. They don't get the options of being alone or being intimately alone with one other individual to kind of do heads down teamwork. They don't get the benefit of anonymity because you probably know your coworkers. So it really just depends on your ability to completely tune everyone out. And not everyone can do that. That's a really big issue. I think it's also important to dive into these functions a little bit. I'm trying to think of examples of how this plays out. If you're surrounded by people all the time, needing that emotional release function of privacy becomes really difficult to achieve because you don't get to relax from those social rules. You kind of have to be on all the time, and then also on top of that be focused on your work, and then also be tuning out everyone around you. So a function of being able to relax from those social roles and having a level of privacy that accommodates that is really important. One of the things that we're experiencing now because of current events is people are working from home a lot. So they're getting to experience that relaxation from social roles, that emotional release. People are getting to experience that way more than they ever did in the past. And you can argue whether that's a good or a bad thing. But it is something that we haven't really been able to do before. We've had to be really on all the time because we're in these environments and we're expected to be on it and in the moment and present and productive and being whatever level of formality and things that you have to be when you're in a public space, basically. So this is interesting about how this might affect the future. Self-evaluation, this is important both for your personal self, but it can also be useful for things that you do for a job or things you do for education, because you're reflecting on your experiences and you're planning action for the future. So maybe you are making your to-do list and planning your calendar and thinking about all the things you've accomplished and all the things that you need to accomplish in the future. Or you're thinking about more personal stuff. So working from home these days, we really have a lot more crossover between those two things, whereas in the past we probably used to really separate those out, where the reflection and self-evaluation for work purposes was done in one context, and reflection and evaluation for our personal selves was done in another context. And now we're really seeing a lot more crossover between those, I think. Personally, this is my own interpretation of our current situation. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I think for a long time we've really tried to separate those things, and maybe those things aren't as separate as we used to think. Another issue in open environments such as workplaces and education institutions, particularly higher education institutions, is there is no place for limited and protected communication. So, man, this is a problem. In my school, where I'm a grad student, in an architecture school, the whole building is planned out in these kind of open plan studios. There is actually nowhere in the entire building you can go and be alone. and there's nowhere you can go and make a phone call where someone won't overhear you. There's not a single place. Not a one. Unless you go into one of 3 single-user restrooms or the lactation room. The lactation room might be kind of comfy. I mean, they have like a comfy lounge chair in there. That could be a nice place, but then you have to feel bad about occupying a lactation room if you're not lactating, and then what if someone is and they need that, you know? It's that same thing of like, the only stall available is the accessible stall, but like, do I want to use it because then I might be taking that away from someone who needs it? You know, we need more of that. So there's nowhere to go to make a phone call, and so in these open environments, people are finding that it's just noisy, because a lot of work does involve making phone calls when you work in an office environment, and when you have just this open plan and everybody's on the phone, it is so noisy. How are you supposed to deal with that? Additionally, something that I have found is that sometimes in the middle of a workday, you need to make a personal call. It happens, and you know, we have a bit of a workplace taboo against that in American work culture. You know, you're supposed to be like 9 to 5, work only, no personal time whatsoever, and if you make a personal call during that time, you are being a bad employee because you're using company time, whatever. Sometimes you need to make a personal call, because you know why? Other places keep only office hours, and you can only call them in the middle of the day because they're not open after work. Like calling a moving company or realtor or the dentist or whatever, you know? Anyway, you don't want to make those phone calls next to your coworkers. You might be talking about personal medical information. You might be revealing all kinds of personal things. It's not necessarily just that you're chatting on the phone to a friend and having a personal conversation about, you know, random things. You're not just chatting. Like, there are private things you might need to call and discuss and make appointments for that you don't want other people overhearing. It's uncomfortable. This is also important because areas for this kind of intimate communication, which is really important if you're going to have the intimacy type of privacy, that can also be important for group work. If you're like working with a partner on a project in a professional or educational context, you might not want to be in a completely public environment, both for, you know, your own privacy of what you're working on, also for your own focus and concentration, also so you don't have to like worry about disturbing other people while you're talking about your project. Next, I want to talk a little bit about some of the kind of conclusions later in the book that they come to that I think are really important for how we think about how humans relate to their environments. One is that people need balance between closedness and openness, right? So the world isn't a binary. It's not just this person needs to be in public all the time and this person needs to be in private space all the time. It changes. It changes depending on what function you need that privacy for. It depends on the type of privacy. It fluctuates up and down, and people need that kind of balance. So there's not just like one or the other. We can't just provide one option. We can't say everything's going to be open. We can't say everything's going to be closed. This is going to work for everyone. The reason for that is not everyone's the same. Altman states that the optimum level of privacy fluctuates depending on the circumstances and how people feel at any given time. I don't know why this is so hard for people to grasp. People have a really, really hard time conceptualizing that some people have an experience different than their own. So people look at the way an environment works and they say, this works for me because of A, B, and C. And then they say, therefore it must work for everyone. And then another person comes along and says, hey, this thing doesn't work for me. And then the first person is like, well, it works for me. Why doesn't it work for you? There must be something wrong with you. That's not how it works. That's not how it works. We need to do better. We need to do better. So getting into the design of these environments and thinking about how to fulfill people's needs, Altman concludes in his chapter, Implications for Environmental Design, with a model that he's created, which he calls the social systems, human ecological model of man. We're going to put aside the fact that he used man as a catch-all term for people. In this model, he proposes that the relationship between human behavior and the environment are a two-way street. So they affect each other. It's not just the environment affects our behavior and our behavior affects the environment. It's both. So he's saying that when we think about designing these environments, they should not solely be designed to meet the needs of people. They should also be flexible, that people can modify to meet their own needs. And the reason this is necessary is because people's needs are complex. So he lays out some considerations for how these environments can be designed. 3 things: privacy, personal space, and territory. That's a new one. So privacy. We need responsive environments that allow us to alternate between being closed off and being together as necessary. Personal space. We need to be able to adjust how close or how far apart we are from people. And lastly, territory. We need a clear division between primary, secondary, and public territories so we understand who has control and stewardship of a space. A primary territory is the most private and gives the most individual control, like a bedroom. Secondary would be kind of in between spaces, and then public territories, we understand, they're public. Some of this stuff is really relevant to the discussions we're having about designing in response to what we need for COVID and thinking about our physical environments in that way. We know that we need more private spaces. We are doing a lot more working from home, a lot more working in enclosed spaces, and then sometimes coming together in a safe way. We're going to, I think we're seeing a lot more understanding of flexibility and personal autonomy in being able to choose what works best depending on what the person needs or the situation warrants. So you can say, this is a task that will be best if I do this at home alone, but for this activity or meeting or task, it would be best if I went in person and met with this other person in a safe way to be able to work on this in a little bit more public space. Likely it's going to be more of an intimate thing, but then again, we need to take into consideration the idea of personal space. Thinking about how far away from other people we want to be also affects educational and workplace environments. So the spacing of desks and seating is something that sometimes is more dense than is now considered safe. We're having to really think about how to put more distance between ourselves, and also maybe using other kinds of barriers in order to maintain some of that density. And this is a really big deal. So we know that we can't just completely space everyone out because there isn't enough physical space in our existing buildings to do this and keep the same number of people in them, because they weren't designed for that, right? So we're saying, okay, either fewer people come in and we're able to space everyone out appropriately, or we maintain that same amount of density and we put barriers between people. Wow, I didn't expect to be getting into a lot of like coronavirus response design, but it's relevant. So when you're designing some of these strategies that involve spacing people out, you also don't necessarily want to make those permanent, because then what do you do then when that kind of spacing isn't necessary anymore in the future? You want to kind of be able to move those things back together. But at the same time, you don't want to make it so easy for people to move things together that they're going to instinctively start pushing tables together and pushing chairs together and getting closer than is currently safe. So you have to find a way to like make it in the future flexible, but also right now make it kind of permanent and discourage people from altering their environments. And it's just a mess. Normally we want people to be able to alter their environments for what makes sense. But right now we can't, and that's hard. So I didn't expect to get into all that, but it's interesting, it's important, it's relevant. Okay, so now I want to get a little bit into thinking about neurodiversity in our physical environments and designing for that. So there is an architecture firm called HOK, which has published some research and theory about how to design for neurodiversity. Let's just start with a little definition. Neurodiversity is the diversity of human minds, the infinite variation in neurocognitive functioning within our species. Walker, 2014. So, I'm going to read you a little bit of this research that my partner and I did in our capstone studio, which is the basis for what I'm talking about right now. It is thought that a large number of people within our population are neurodivergent, often unknowingly. Neurodiverse people need an environment which allows them to thrive. Sargent et al. 2019. So, HOK posits that designing spaces along the spectrum of sensitivity provides people with choices over their environment to best suit their individual needs. HOK 2020. Choice in our environment? What? Who's ever heard of that being a thing? It's important. Do you know why? Because a lot of people are neurodivergent, and you don't know that. And you can't just say, this works for me, so it must work for you. No. No. So, the way that HOK explains this is you have this spectrum of hypersensitive to hyposensitive. So, you want space types that can serve a variety of functions along that spectrum. You might have places to concentrate and focus, to commune and process, to create, to congregate, meet and learn, to contemplate or refresh, and also convivial and social spaces. Now, all of those can be designed either in a way that is hypersensitive or hyposensitive. For some people, concentrating and focusing needs to be in a completely closed-off environment. Why is that? Because they can't do the tuning things out. Some people can't. Some people cannot. For some people, they like to be in a busy environment. They want hyposensitive spaces. They want to be in a public space that works for them doing that kind of heads down, concentrating work. For some people who want to commune and process, that would be those small groups, that intimacy type, you might want a slightly larger enclosed space that two people could work together in. Or you might want a space that's more open. Or what's really popular right now is in a lot of university libraries, they're making these kind of collaborative workstations that are semi-open, semi-closed. That's a nice in-between, but it doesn't work for everyone. You can't just say, all of these spaces are going to be kind of open. You need a variety. You always need a variety. Some people, for creativity, might need solitude. They might need to be alone in a space. Some people, for creativity, might do well when they are communicating and brainstorming with others, and they might want a more communal space for doing that. Both are valid approaches to creativity. Both are. Some people do some of that thinking and processing and creating and coming up with ideas on their own, and then they come back to the group, and then they discuss, and then they process together. Some people need to start that process with others and just start rapid fire, spitballing ideas, brainstorming with other people, and that helps them. Both are valid, and everything in between is also valid. And also, just because one is working for you right in one moment doesn't mean it's always like that. So it's not really fair to say, well, you did this that one time. You started the process with this public, communal brainstorming session, but now you want to be alone to think and then come back to the group. That you need to allow for that, because things change. People change. Circumstances change. Whatever. It's fine. It's all fine. So the reason that this is really, really important to me and why I wanted to make this video is this is really personal to me. I'm a person who often needs hypersensitive spaces. Excuse me for a minute. So, the program I'm in is called Interior Architecture and Product Design. It is housed within a college of architecture in a broader university. So I'm in a pretty conventional architecture studio setting most of the time. If you don't know what this is like, it's kind of like an office, but worse. You're in this really big open room, squeezed in with tons and tons of people. Everyone kind of has their own little desk area, but they're young, they're students, they're messy, they're making models, they are living unhealthy lifestyles and sleeping under their desks and eating at their desks and never leaving studio. It's bad. It's bad. People are frustrated, people are pulling all-nighters, it's just chaos. It kind of becomes your home base, your landing station throughout the day. So you come in, you drop your stuff off at studio, and then maybe you go off to a class, and then you come back, and then you socialize with people as they're coming in from their classes, and then maybe you have some time and you work on a project at your desk a little bit, heads down, and then, maybe you go off to another class. Depending on people's schedules, there might be like a ton of people there all at once, and then everyone disappears because they all go off to the same class, and then everybody comes back all at once, and it's loud and chaotic, and people are just incessantly talking. Did I mention that it's cluttered and chaotic? So I do not thrive in this environment. I am a person who is particularly sensitive to auditory stimulation, particularly people talking. I find it really, really hard to deal with noisy environments. Like, really, really hard. If you don't experience this, you can't possibly imagine. You're probably like, oh, it's fine. No, it's not fine. Like, I don't even know how to describe it. I have kind of like a panic attack or a meltdown or something. I get really irritable, and I get completely overwhelmed, and I cannot deal. So, in my past, I have started architecture school and then dropped out of architecture school, and then I started grad school in this program again, and I have realized in the last year that if we had not gone into lockdown and been forced to really find new ways of functioning and working from home, I might have had to drop out again. I'm not an unmotivated person. I'm hardworking, I'm intelligent, I'm creative. Like, there's nothing wrong with me, But the fact that the simple existence of an environment could cause me to not only not thrive, but fail, I can't even imagine what people with other neurodivergences are going through. And in fact, I have a theory that that really is a big contributing factor to people having to drop out of design schools. So, back to this idea of you can't possibly imagine the experience of someone else. People just have such a hard time conceptualizing that people have other experiences. So when a person with a different experience says to another person, particularly someone who's thriving in the existing environment and they're doing just fine, hey, I need X, this isn't working for me, then that person, even if they listen and they understand, they're not going to prioritize that other person's needs. So basically what I'm saying is, if you don't allow neurodivergent people to thrive and succeed within design school, then they're not going to then go on to positions of higher education in design, and they're not going to go on to the professional world. And we need neurodivergent people in those positions so that they can then advocate for creating environments that are more accommodating to neurodivergent people. When it comes to diversity, you can't just say, we need to be aware that other people exist and try to design for their needs. That's great. That's a good starting point. However, we need people with diverse needs to actually be in the position of doing that designing of environments. You can't just be like, I'm gonna try to make something that works for this type of person, and then never have those people in the... It's just not gonna work. It's just not gonna work. How do we expect to be able to design for diversity if we don't have diversity in the workforce, in positions of higher education? And we can't have people in those positions unless diverse people are able to succeed and thrive in design school. And we can't have people of diverse needs succeed within design school unless we design environments that meet a diverse range of needs, and it's a vicious cycle. For me, in the past, I have tried to say, hey, I can't thrive in this studio environment. And what people always say to me is, well, why don't you put on some headphones and listen to music? If that works for you, I love that for you. But for me, that doesn't help the problem. The problem isn't just tuning out the outside environment. The problem is the auditory stimulation. So trying to drown out distracting noise with more noise? It doesn't matter if it's like relaxing music. Like, it's more noise on top of the other noise. That makes it worse. That actually just makes it worse. And I get even more stressed out. This is really hard for people to understand. I know, because I've tried to explain it to them. And they always respond with, just listen to music. Just wear headphones. And I'm like, I'm trying to tell you that I have different needs than you. I've been in situations in the past where I tried to explain to a professor that I can't concentrate in a studio environment. And I would like to do a lot more work from home and then periodically check in. And they say, well, as long as you're here for the full 4.5 hours of studio time. But if I have to spend all those 4.5 hours of studio time in studio, I'm not getting anything done, and that's wasting my time. And then I have to then find 4.5 more hours outside of that to do my actual work from home. Do you see the problem with this? And I'm not saying that studio never works for me. Things change. My needs change. People's needs change. And sometimes I'm more stressed out or I'm more distracted. And then I really do need to have complete and total silence, and then I can just really thrive. Sometimes I don't necessarily need that, and then it's okay. What I really hope for us for the future is that we really start to accommodate a lot more of that flexibility. And I think we're already starting to see it. We don't necessarily have to work with this model of I leave home, I arrive at my workplace or at school, and I do only that thing for 8 straight hours, and then I go home and have my personal life. That's really not how human brains work. You can't do that. So the future really is about being able to be self-aware enough to know and identify what you need in any particular moment, and then creating the structures in our society, in our institutions, and creating adaptable environments which respect those varying needs and give us the autonomy we need to be able to select what we need accordingly. We can't just say, you need to be here at X time and do this, 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 and this, and do it in this way. We need to be able to say, hey, this is what I need at this moment, and then people to say, okay, and trust each other to do their work. Everything about going through school and being a member of society and in the workforce and doing this in mindful and healthy ways has to do with being able to identify our needs and then figuring out how to then meet those needs. That's really all it is. And I think that's a really good thing that that's what we're moving towards. Something really interesting was in my own research when a bunch of students were surveyed about their preferred working conditions. A lot of them responded with this profession of an idea that there is value in intentionally changing up your environment in order to help your concentration and your mental well-being. And I think that's really interesting, that not only are we starting to move towards this idea of identifying what you need in any particular moment, but also that people really do place value on being able to change things up, and that that is something that's important to them. Thank you for joining me on this discussion today. This is something that I have been researching and thinking about and designing about for a year and a half now, and it's really important. And I think we have some really interesting social discussions to have and discourses to have about how we're moving forward in the future. And it's really one of the reasons that I'm so passionate about going into academia and trying to make design education better for people. I want it to be better. I don't want my future students to suffer the way I suffered. I want to make it better for them. I think it's really important. I think that we have the tools and we can keep developing the research to really, really shape a better future. And that is our power as designers. If you want more content like this about design theories and academic research-based ideas, like and subscribe. Let me know in the comments what you want me to talk about. I love research. I love learning about these things, and I would love to do more. See ya. Can you not? I moved that there so you wouldn't get to it. Behavioral theories, Sir! Good grief. Theories, particularly concerning ideas of... Dandy, come on. He woke up just in time for me to do a video. This is Alan Weston and... My cat is scratching at her thing. Oh my god. As soon as I start talking, she starts making noise. Now my laptop went to sleep because I waited so long. Oh my... Be right back. Come on. Where are you? No, don't be a butt. Don't run away from me. Oh my god. So mischievous. I can't capture her. She's running away. Get your butt out of the frame. Be polite. Will you get out of the way, please? Please? Please?